Hello. Things have been a little bit more uncertain in the labor markets. There's been layoffs, a lot of different things happening, mostly concentrated in the tech industry, but the layoffs also have been seen in other industries. And I think that there's been a little bit of uncertainty in the workplace overall. A little bit of a different dynamic than what we saw in 2021 coming out of the COVID crisis, where there weren't enough workers to fill the jobs available. So now it's been a little bit different. We've seen less people quit their jobs, and that's kind of what I'm showing here on this chart. I'm showing here the ratio of the number of people quitting their jobs versus the number of people that are being hired. And here's what I want to touch on specifically. I'm showing here a economic indicator of housing. This is essentially the number of houses that are being started in terms of construction. And I have a bit of a lead time here. There's a 3-quarter lead time. And very simply, the point here is in periods of stronger housing activity, generally what you'll see is a pickup in economic activity. And I've written about this in my blog, in a couple blogs actually, and the explanation is just really simple. If you think about when you build a home, you need to hire workers, you need to hire electricians and plumbers, and there's really a domino effect in terms of how many industries are impacted by a pickup in housing activity. So it takes time from somebody to start building a house to the time that it's completed, to the time that it goes on the market and then it gets sold and people buy it. And now you're gonna hire an attorney, you're gonna hire an agent, et cetera. The point being, there is a lag time in between the time that the housing unit is started to the latest transaction, which is really, when somebody buys a home and starts buying furniture and whatnot. So this is why this explains broader economic indicators. And in this case, I'm using the ratio of number of people quitting to the number of people being hired. Okay, so that gives you the context, and what you see is that in almost every cycle, these kind of line up perfectly, these inflection points where you start to see a pickup in housing activity, either recover roughly, call it just under a year, before there's an inflection point in the labor markets. So let me zoom in on a couple of these periods. You can see this, I'm gonna drag these so you can really see the relationship. So I'll raise this higher. You can see this in the wake of the 2008-2009 crisis. You really saw that low point in housing activity take place just before you really started to see a shift in the labor market. And the reason why this relationship works is because, think about it, when you are more confident about the economic backdrop, you probably feel a little better about quitting your job and going for a higher paying job, let's say. And that is why this line goes up, because there are more people that the worker is in a better bargaining position to quit their jobs and go somewhere else and say, I can get more money for this, or I want to do something different, or what have you. So let's go back to the auto scale, and I want to specifically zoom in on what's been happening lately. So let's kind of zone in on the COVID environment. So remember the Great Resignation period, that was really right here. It was when people coming out of the COVID crisis, there weren't enough workers for, whatever reasons. And you saw a lot of people quitting their jobs. And in order for you to accept a job, you wanted to make a certain amount of money. That's what it was going to take for you to come back to work after either being laid off because of what happened during COVID, or you just decided to quit and not work for a while, whatever your reasons were. You said some people retired early and they came back to the workforce asking for higher wage gains. And that's why we saw such a massive ramp up in inflation, because workers were asking to be paid more money. So now companies had to pay them more money. And in order for companies to keep profit, they had to also raise their prices. And that's kind of what we've been seeing in the last couple of years. And now let's look specifically at 2022, where the opposite took place. Now we've seen the peak in inflation, which really inflation is still going up. It's just not going up as much. And with that, the labor markets have tightened a little bit because the economy has slowed because inflation was so high. The consumer has had to cut back on spending, so that with that, and here what you see is, the housing activity started to slow. Remember the housing boom? It was hard to even buy a house. People were getting into like price bidding wars just to buy a house. People were paying above the asking price to secure that house. I mean, that is crazy. And that's, in essence, in 2022, we kind of saw the reverse of that. We saw the slowdown in housing activity, and with that, you saw a slowdown in broader economic indicators, such as employment indicators like this one. So let's look a little bit closer at what's going on today. Here's what I see. I see that there's been a pickup in housing activity recently, at least in the last couple quarters. And if this relationship holds, and people start to feel better about the economy, and they say, you know what, I'm going to start looking for something that pays me more because I want a raise, or whatever your reasons are. If this relationship holds, I actually think that this is a good thing for workers. I think in the last year and a half, workers have really struggled either with layoffs or not getting that wage gain to keep up with inflation, or you're being asked to return to the office full time when people still want to work at home. So as you can see here, workers have not really been on the driver's seat since like late 2022, and especially since last year. And employers took advantage of that. They said, well, because the labor markets have softened and people aren't quitting as much, and it's easier to find people to fill those roles, well, we're going to make people come back to the office. If you really want to keep your job, you're going to come back to the office. And that's the relationship that we've seen. And that's why workers feel a little bit misled and a little bit blindsided by employers, because they were told that you could do your job from wherever in the world, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, never mind. And that's because the labor markets have softened, and employers know that employees are not in a place where they can just bargain either their salary or where they get to work. So that's why monitoring this is so important to me, because from my standpoint, if I start to see the labor markets improve and not deteriorate, then I would probably feel a little bit better about finding something else, because I know that there's more people that are transitioning jobs. There's a little bit more going on. And that way it's going to be easier for me to find a job, and it's going to be easier for me to potentially ask for a higher salary, because if this relationship holds, then, the workers are back on the driver's seat. So I just wanted to give an update, really explaining what is a transmission mechanism between what's happening in the housing market and the economy, with how employees need to think about their prospects on a going forward basis. I hope this was helpful, and please reach out to me if you have any questions.